It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
I'm Lee.
Yes.
We are joined once again by special guest P.H. Lee.
And yet when that goes out in the world, it'll sound perfectly smooth, as if nothing went wrong. Hi, today we are doing a book called The Summer Prince, and since this book does not include any lesbians at all,
it does include bisexual women.
It includes bisexual women, but this is a default bisexual society.
There are also there are women who are only interested in other women, but they're not the protagonists.
Yes. Are there? Is that in the text?
June's mom and stepmom.
June's mom was married to a man.
Yeah, before. But now she's married to her stepmom. So for all we know, the stepmom.
But that's for all we know. Not.
I mean, also we take a fairly expansive definition of lesbian in this podcast, and those two are in what we would consider a lesbian relationship.
The point
but they're not the protagonist.
That for the first time in some time, this is a default bisexual book. But the point is that the central romance is heterosexual, and the secondary central romance is gay male. So it's not Wizards versus Lesbians, which means this is a bonus episode, which means that we have Lee here. Hello, Lee.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for doing this with me. I do really like this book.
Yes. Would you like to tell us what the plot of it is?
So in a post-apocalyptic, arcology city-state, sort of a city-state in a single giant building off the coast of Brazil, a young woman named June gets caught in a love triangle with her mostly gay best friend and Enki, the summer prince, who is selected, as they select every 8 years, a young man who is ritually the king of the city for a year and then gets sacrificed, a human sacrifice ritual. And over the course of the book, they uncover all sorts of secret history and things that might upset the status quo of their society and so on and so forth.
Yep, that sounds about right.
Yep.
We just went over the are there lesbians in this book. Unless, Lee, you have a secret lesbian pitch, which you often do.
I do not have a secret lesbian pitch exactly. What I would say is there are many, many bisexuals in this book.
True. Everybody, in fact, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. I mean, there's an argument. You could make an argument that the women who run the city-state are kind of lesbian wizards. But more to the point of the podcast, I think this book is very bisexual, but also it is incredibly interested in how sexy men are.
Oh, yeah.
And so if that is something that is upsetting to you, you will not like this book. This book is so into how sexy its male characters are.
I refuse to call that a content warning, but it may be a reason why you don't want to read this book. So yes, there are no magic users, but
I would say that Enki's abilities with the bots is basically magic.
Yes, this book, however, contains the imperialist or dictator wizards, as Lee mentioned, in the form of the matriarchs of the society. So we do have that to work with.
Yes, I would also say that, like, yeah, they have the dystopian society wizards, but also the ambassador from Tokyo 10. Yes, it is technically nanotech, but he's a wizard.
Yeah,
that's wizardry.
Yes, he's old. He keeps important information to himself until the last moment. He likes to have sex with people much, much younger than him.
Yes, and he manipulates young people by using narrative structure.
Yes, this is true. So why should you read this book?
It's well written and generally quite enjoyable.
I think if you read any of the sort of YA love triangle books of the 2010s and were like, why don't the male the two men hook up with each other, you will really like reading this book, because it is definitely written by someone who had exactly the same experience of exactly the same genre.
Indeed. Much has been said about books where it's like, well, what if prejudice, what if sexism, what if racism, but in reverse? And this book is one of those, but it's really good at it. Like it does a much better job with that thing than I think most other books that I've read that are attempting to pull the same thing off. By stopping short of cartoonish prejudice and also keeping colorism, which is nice, and there was a third thing that it does. Oh yeah, it also sort of, while sort of flopping the male and female power dynamic in the society, the women still read like women and the men still read like men. Relative to the gender roles that an American reader in 2025 would expect and recognize, they read like the genders they are despite the shift in the power dynamics of blah, 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 blah. So, thumbs up on that front. Why shouldn't you read it?
I mean, I already did my major one, which is just, if you're not interested in men who are portrayed as just incredibly sexy and that is boring to you, you will be bored for a lot of this book.
I suppose if you don't want to read a YA book about, an extremely, extremely privileged girl discovering that her society is dystopian, like if that sounds annoying to you, it sounds annoying to me, but this book didn't annoy me, but still, it is there.
I mean, that's sort of the theme of the book, is her not only figuring that out, but also I think the thing that keeps it from being annoying is that it has a more nuanced and detailed view of how capturing the privileged into the sort of fascist overclass happens. Like the sort of, this has a really good, like, this is how you take the revolutionary energy of young people and turn it to the benefit of the state.
Yes, bread and circuses and sorry, the cat. Bread and circuses and human sacrifice.
Yes, and the Queen's Award. We mustn't forget the Queen's Award.
Oh yes, and we mustn't forget scholarships, college
exactly.
scholarships.
So I think on that level, it does come up as more nuanced. I don't think that this book really pulls off the whole not making the Japanese caricatures thing. I think that it's I think it's a wee bit racist in that specific way. But that's pretty much the only quibble that I have with it.
I mean, it definitely has a thing, and the people I know who have not liked the book, who weren't, for the reason I already said, have talked about this. It's the thing is, there's so much science fiction and fantasy does this that I have a really hard time faulting the book for it specifically. But it does kind of turn national. I mean, the presentation of different national groups in the book is kind of based on current world stereotypes of those groups, magnified through a lens of things. I mean, there's a degree to which this is also, the Brazil of this book is like a hyper real Brazil.
It's so Brazil. It's like more Brazilian. It's like a Brazilian times more Brazilian than you could possibly have hoped for. And in some ways, it's the Brazil of the 1960s more than the Brazil of the 2020s. Mm-hmm. Also, like they do capoeira, they don't do Brazilian jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
So there's that. But that's, as you say, that's pretty much just the standard. I just thought that Ueda-sama was particularly galling in that respect. They didn't have to make him kinky on top of everything else, but regardless.
Well, he's also kind of the last Japanese man in the world. So he has to.
Yeah, he is.
He has to embody all the stereotypes.
He's out there dreaming of sushi and getting whipped by lithe young men.
I mean, it just occurred to me because, of course, this book was published a while ago, and I read it a while ago. Is he an isekai protagonist? Is he a Japanese man suddenly transported into a world in which there are no Japanese people, and the power of his Japaneseness makes him super powerful?
No, he's just the only guy. He's the only guy who couldn't join the singularity.
Yeah, no, he was left behind by the rapture and is forced to be Japanese by getting whipped, and then I'll censor my own spoiler by mentioning that this book is overwhelmingly pro-meat, which we didn't bother to discuss. It loves the flesh, it disdains cyberspace, and is therefore in tune with the modern zeitgeist more than the time of its writing. But I guess that's a spoiler. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we've gotten well into spoilers at this point.
Content warnings.
Content warnings.
Murder.
Yeah.
Human sacrifice. Some body horror.
A lot of questionable sexual decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That I don't want to really put a label on, but are definitely questionable sexual decisions.
Yeah. Other than that, and there's some like open colorism.
Oh yeah, open colorism and also, I mean, there's the sort of general YA dystopia stuff, classism. That was the thing. This has already been mentioned, but the protagonist is a very clueless upper class girl at the start, and she gets somewhat more clueful. But like, if that just absolutely you cannot handle it, then you won't be able to.
And she only ever gets somewhat more clueful.
I mean, I will say this before the spoiler zone. It looks like up until about 2/3 of the book that she's really not going to get a clue, and she does in fact eventually get a clue of some kind. So
yeah, that's true.
There is that at least.
I feel like that aspect is really benefited by the fact that the author seems to understand how annoying this trait of her protagonist is.
Yeah, I mean, among other things, there's plenty of stuff that doesn't go well for June, and, you still get to feel the impact of what it's like to be, even an extremely privileged teenage girl. It still really sucks to have, your date abandon you for the superstar guy, right? And, national TV is now showing you being abandoned on the dance floor or whatever. Like, that's very much a privileged girl problem to have, but, you can also feel why she would be, and why she would have some emotions about this.
I think there is a genuine distinction between our protagonist sees like the riots on the news and feels bad about it, and our protagonist literally gets splattered with somebody's brains because she's at the riot.
True.
I think
that is when she starts to really, come around, but
that helps, in terms of, her not seeming completely like out of sort of the book does a very good job of indicating that this is her life, and she's actually making sacrifices and thinking about things.
Yeah.
But shall we head on to the spoiler zone to talk about the book?
Yes.
Yes.
We somehow miss suicide despite it being a major theme of this book and our subsequent discussion. Spoiler zone.
So actually, I have an opening question for Lee, which is that our two main boys are named Gil and Enki, and since you're the person I know who's most into the Epic of Gilgamesh, is this on? Do you see any like deliberate thematic resonance here?
So this is very interesting because actually the first time I read this book, it was recommended to me by someone because I was at the time trying to write a Sumerian themed fantasy YA novel, and they said, "Oh, you should read Summer Prince," and I did, and I was like, "That was very good." It has very little to do with Sumer. I mean, yes, it's a thing. I mean, I guess it's a little bit like like if character is named Persephone and she has a relationship with a whatever, but it doesn't. My feeling is that it didn't go that deep on it, other than Enki is from the outside, but like Gil is not like Gilgamesh in any way.
Okay.
And clearly this was maybe a jumping off point or just a fun thing, but it's more in the category of reference than I think like retelling or working with any of the major themes.
Particularly given that we are in Brazil, and so at least according to the audiobook, these characters' names are pronounced Ju and Anki.
Amazing.
But anyway, we were going to talk about whether the author is aware of how annoying the protagonist's sort of privileged cluelessness is, and I think the fact that she literally jerks off to thinking about her own art should answer that question for you.
Yeah. Okay. Fair.
I just in general, Elia Don Johnson, the author of this book, is incredibly good at writing clueless, privileged teenagers who are nonetheless extremely sympathetic and interesting to read about.
That's good. I
Yeah.
I appreciate that because somewhat privileged teenagers are pretty much what YA heroes tend to be, in one way or another. So they should at least have to deal with the consequences of that. But it's like there's also, I mean, to me at least, there's also something really sympathetic about that sort of teenage art is actually the most important thing in the world, and grounding me is essentially the same as silencing my voice, like the voice of one of my generation's premier creators, kind of thing.
And
that kind of adolescent self-belief is charming, up to a certain extent.
And I think it ties in well to her, the fact she's initially so obsessed with Enki and with the Verde, this underclass, because she wants to be the greatest artist in the city, and she's really, so of course she's really wants to like be authentic, and she cares about authenticity, and she understands that being the daughter of a university president and the stepdaughter of one of the city's matriarchs makes it harder for her to access that kind of authenticity.
Yeah, she's very much concerned about that. And again, that's very on the nose. Like
right.
A teenager may not understand a whole lot about how her society works or his or her society works, but they definitely understand how face works, how privilege works, and how status works, because like that is the number one thing on their mind at all times.
Right.
So speaking of which, I just want to say for the audience, because Alexis mentioned the Verde. So they're in the city-state. There was some sort of apocalypse 400 years ago. They're in a city-state. For some reason, there's no countries anymore, just city-states. But it is literally a giant pyramid.
Yeah.
Of which the upper class people live on the top and the lower class people live on the bottom, and the bottom is called the Verde because there are hydrogen producing algae tanks that I guess power their city that are green and smell bad.
Mm-hmm. The Verci, incidentally.
Oh, okay. I don't know how to pronounce Brazilian.
Neither do I.
But
the audiobook says the Verci, so that's where I'm going with it. But
yeah, let's assume the audiobook has it right.
Yeah. So in this, it is very much like our
any Brazilians listening to this podcast.
So this will have come out after episode 100 of Wizards vs. Lesbians. So this is exactly the same situation as Kill la Kill.
That's true.
And it's the same metaphor. Although actually it's also, to be fair, the same as the city in Space Between Worlds and its sequel, where you have this giant arcology because the outside world is so environmentally degraded, and the rich people live at the top of it and the poor people live at the bottom of it, and like what floor you live on basically is as good as a zip code as determining your social status.
Yep. This one's only got like 8 tiers or 10 tiers though.
It's true. They're very roomy tiers, one gets the feeling.
One of the interesting things about the book to me, in terms of that genre, is that Well, they are living in this arcology, and it's kind of implied that all the other important places on Earth are also city states. And certainly, like from the perspective of June, the protagonist, it is the most important place on Earth, or one of the most important places on Earth, Palmeres Tres. But there are plenty of people who are living outside, and well, June is very weird and condescending about them. They seem to be doing basically okay. And I think that that's very interesting in contrast to sort of the outside is just a blasted wasteland where no one can live or only has Mad Max style, gangs or something like that.
That's true. The one time they encounter because when they're escaping and they encounter the farmers, and the farmers are in a position to not turn them in for the massive reward, they're just like, oh, okay. We would, they're doing well enough that they can afford to let these kids go to spite the snobby arcology city, instead of getting, a million, whatever the currency is.
We do have the sort of privileged terror of the outside world thing that isn't necessarily reflected in what actually goes on out there. I will say that we don't have Bad Max gangs, but we do have West Side Story gangs. Yeah. We have the Sharks and the Jets here, except they're cyberpunk and Brazilian. Boy, crazy boy, get cool, boy. Got a rocket in your pocket. Keep cool, boy. Don't get hot, 'cause man, you got some high times ahead. Take it slow, daddy-o, you can live it up and die in bed. Boy, crazy boy, stay loose, boy. Breeze it, buzz it, easy does it. Turn off the juice, boy. Why aren't you playing samba, you fool, boy? Because it's too hard, boy. Real hard. And
that is fair.
And once again, it has the feeling like, okay, this is sort of Brazil has come from the 1960s, but so has like the bad city has also come from the 1960s in a certain way.
Yeah.
There's a kind of everything has a sort of a quaint feeling about it, even as it's far future tech. But sorry, Lee, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, June talking about the outside world, and in general, the people of the city talking about the outside world, strikes me as very much as like people who never left Manhattan in their entire life talking about Ohio.
or people from the suburbs talking about Brooklyn. In this case, New Yorkers' attitude toward New Jersey. I mean...
Yeah, that's fair. That's also fair. But there's definitely sort of an aspect of the... I'm so sheltered, I have no idea what it's like, but I'm sure it's very bad.
Yes, exactly. I mean, it's got to be worse than the slums of our city, which smell bad.
Right, yes. And which occasionally people move to.
Yes.
One of the very interesting things about the dynamics is with Enki, who becomes the Summer Prince, who's poor, and so there's this sort of like, oh, he's from the poor thing, is that he's an immigrant, and he immigrated too old to get gene mods, so his skin is darker than your skin is legally allowed to be inside the city.
Yes.
Which makes him exotic and authentic.
Yes, he immigrated in utero, but like he's not really an immigrant. He was born in the city, but because he was, his mom was 6 months along with him.
I think this book does a really good job because to loop back to the whole Summer Prince thing. Basically, there's a reality show, and and sort of, it has like echoes of the Hunger Games and all that kind of stuff about it, wherein a sacrificial prince is elected, not drafted. These folks have to volunteer to be a part of this, but is elected, and then in order to ratify the righteousness of the rule of the queen, he has to choose the queen who actually runs things when he is about to be killed.
And I like that they're very blatant about when they sacrifice him, there's only one other person in the room, and that's the queen, the current queen. So
yes, it is a formality. Although the other summer, what is it, like the Moon Prince, or
No. There are sun years and moon years. It's always the summer king.
Mm-hmm.
But moon years. So each queen. This is very echoes of the American presidential system,
Yes.
and particularly in the 90s when it looked like we were going to spend 8 years trading off parties, that everyone gets reelected and then the other party gets elected in the next one, which of course is absolutely no longer true. But when the book was written,
Well, the book came out in 2013, so
yeah. So the young, the when they alternate young princes and old princes, and the young prince is re-electing the queen to her second term, so he doesn't get a choice. And then when they pick the older man, who also gets sacrificed, they pick somebody who is, politically adept and is actually choosing the next queen from a variety of possible options.
Yes, although he also chooses the same queen over and over again, at least in the era of the city that we are talking about here. But anyway, so the book is very sort of astute in being like, well, this is a conduit for like what political energy and power the youth have, because because of gene mods, people live to be in their hundreds and 200s in this society, and so that means that the boomers that you are anxiously waiting to die are just not going to.
which for 2013 felt kind of
Real.
on the nose. Yeah.
Still does, honestly. And the book gives a very good sense of the frustration inherent in that. And in order to bleed off this frustration, the youth are allowed essentially to pick their own guy, who will get shot and will not change anything, but at least they get to pick this.
Not even shot. His throat gets cut with a knife, right?
Right, exactly.
So I will say, have either of you read the Snow Queen by, what is it, Joan Vinge?
No,
I have not.
Oh, because this book is clearly also inspired by that. It's another science fiction book with like sun years and moon years, and scheming queen and far future. But it is not worth. It is not. I'm mentioning it because otherwise somebody probably will write in and mention it. And it is an interesting forebear to this one. But other than that, I don't think it needs to be dug in too much.
fair enough. I think so, but regardless, the book is very smart about knowing that it is in fact the sort of peasant chic that Anki is capable of bringing to the table. That is what lets him capture the hearts of the youth.
Oh yeah, I mean, like even June is aware. Even June, who is fairly smart and culturally aware, as befits a talented young artist, is very clear that this is what that this is the appeal that he holds for her and so many of her fellow privileged teens. She just is so swept up in the romance of it that she doesn't quite get that that this is also a way of taking the best and the brightest of the generation, and and if there is anyone from the lower ranks, great, make him king and then murder him after a year.
Yes, or even if he doesn't get elected, he is sort of subsumed into the palace system the way that the other runners-up are, and is therefore suborned. And if we're going by this is an American election metaphor, Anki is Barack Obama. And Anki does indeed have the same general sort of smooth, handsome smugness that Barack does. But I would have loved to have seen Barack parade before the Queen, who I guess is the Supreme Court in this metaphor, dressed up in slave clothes with dirt on his head dancing around. But that's perhaps where the metaphor breaks down.
Yes.
I feel that might not have been a good choice for Barack Obama.
Nor perhaps sexy dancing with, the other gay teenager.
Well, this is a different society, different norms.
It's very. I mean, I think it's very interesting. I think it's also very interesting that there's an interesting thing with Gil, where people are minors, basically. They're wakas if they're under 30.
Waka from the Japanese wakai, meaning young. Granji from the English grand and Japanese jiji. Nope, got that wrong. Because I was listening to the audiobook, and Grande is pronounced Granji in Brazilian Portuguese. So I was primed to look for Japanese, and I didn't think that maybe this is the same reason that Verde is pronounced Vergi, you know? So the young people are called by a Japanese word, and the old people are called by a Portuguese word, which makes sense.
And his mom had him at 16, and so she is also a waka, or was for much of his life, and that's like somewhat scandalous, but it also means that she's the cool mom.
Right.
Babies making babies, yeah.
Yeah, which I think is a very interesting, like, it's interesting when you see these sorts of extended adolescences because people live longer, and also metaphors for extended adolescences in modern society and so on and so forth. You often don't sort of think about teen pregnancy in those metaphors, and I think it's very interesting that this book really does.
Yeah, no, I like that. There's a lot of good extrapolation from sort of the conditions in this book. The author clearly thought a lot about how the society would actually function under these circumstances. And another huge plot point is assisted suicide.
Yeah.
As actually, we should throw that back into the content warnings.
That's a content warning because there's a lot of suicide. The book has a very ambivalent relationship with assisted suicide. I mean, part of June's like a big emotional arc is accepting that no, her mother shouldn't have tried to stop her father from committing suicide.
Well, I think that like one of the weird points that this book ends up making is that men love dying and being dead. Like most of the men in this, like the men in this book, like seem to commit suicide at the drop of a hat. Anki
it's true. Even Gil wanted to be in the running for Summer Prince. He just decided not to be because it would break his mom and his best friend's hearts.
Right, and I think that we should probably talk some about that. Because there's sort of
none of the women ever do.
Yeah.
Well, their society very much valorizes male suicide and it valorizes women living an incredibly long time and holding enormous amounts of political power.
Yeah, I'm wondering, like, to a certain extent, minus the women holding enormous amounts of political power, this is actually sort of an interesting take on our current gender roles. Like,
this is the sort of every desire to commit suicide is their equivalent of toxic masculinity.
Well, yes, but also in real life, men commit suicide in much higher rates than women do. And
yes, and also, I mean, we have a society, and societies throughout history have valorized both male suicide and extremely high risk-taking behavior from men.
Yes, which is partially how we've made armies.
Yes, it is indeed.
And
because societies that have those traits make armies really well.
Though I will note, if we're talking about real life, I believe that women report higher rates of suicidal ideation. It's just men have higher rates of successful suicide. That could be an urban legend, but that's what I recall reading.
I don't believe that there is a biological difference here. I believe that this is mostly social programming. And that it's like women are expected to keep things going under impossible circumstances, and men are, and it's much more valorized for men to try to do something impossible or break trying.
Sure, but if more women are attempting suicide than men, I'm not sure how this works for your argument.
Well, you said ideation rather than attempts. But
I think actually attempts. I'm Googling this as we talk, and I'm getting
yes.
attempts.
My understanding is that in our current culture, but also
Let's start out by saying I'm not trying to parrot men's rights activist talking points here. The global death rate by suicide is about twice as high in men than it is in women. But the suicide attempt rate in women is higher. Some people have said that this is because women tend to choose less effective means of killing themselves. I don't know. But I'm willing to posit that any explanation that relies on an essential biological difference between men and women is incorrect.
I will note that by the standards of masculine cultures of history, American called standards of masculinity are substantially less valorizing of death and of suicide. I mean, we still do. We absolutely still do. But there's an undercurrent of, oh God, I don't remember what World War II general it was. I think it's MacArthur going, the point is not to die for your country, it's to make the other motherfucker die for his.
Right.
Which is very different. I mean, that is a thing which makes American culture somewhat distinct. But yeah, I mean, I just definitely, regardless of current demographics, though, this book is very, very interested in the romance of men killing themselves or immolating themselves in service of a goal.
Yeah, which dovetails with the kind of romance of youth, romance of art bit. There's a sort of live fast, die young, live a beautiful corpse ideology that is sort of presented as being distinct from the aunties and the old folks' just keep living and ignore the fact that everything is slowly crumbling.
And one
ideology.
of the things that June is, I think, struggling with is that she really likes the romance of self-immolation, for art and beauty, but she is of a gender and class that says, no, you're supposed to live to be 300.
Well, and notably, I mean, the book, the book is about, like, undermining the rotten foundations of their dystopian society. The book absolutely normalizes that. June is the one who's left holding the bag at the end.
That's right. She's our teenage queen at the end of this.
Right. Like, she's the one who actually now has to hold and wield political power and, can't just romantically self-immolate and then let someone else work out the details.
Yeah.
And her sort of coming to terms with that is what she's going to have to do is part of her growth process in the book. But it is very interesting that the story of the book has its own fictional values. It conforms to its own fictional values. This is a book right. that people in the city that the book takes place in would like.
Right.
Which I think is really interesting.
Right. I mean, it's very much in line with what, the youth of the city would want. It still has your male self-sacrifice, but this time the teenager gets to be, the Waka gets to be queen. And also because the thing that works, the thing that allows Unki to overthrow the society is, harnessing its own traditions against it, right? Like he makes sure that his death is, dramatically marks June with the digital big red handprint of his blood.
On her womb, incidentally.
Yep. I don't think that's incidental. I think that this is a book written by someone who cares a lot about symbolism, in which all of the main characters care a lot about symbolism.
Right.
So,
yeah.
That is something that I really like about this book, which is sort of a tangent, but the fact that everyone in the book is some kind of artist means that they're constantly analyzing the symbolism of things that happen. Which often people in novels don't do, I think, because writers feel like it's a little winky. But I really like that in this book. It feels very sincere. It doesn't feel, it never makes me feel like the author is winking at me. It just makes me feel like the characters are the sort of people who do this to their own lives.
We actually just talked about this with Ammonite, which stars an anthropologist who's always talking about all the anthropological significance of the stuff around her, and she's like, well, fair enough, it is your job,
Right. And I mean, this is, and much like actually with Ammonite, where it was fun to watch the main character process, use her sort of social processing and observation to avoid actually dealing with her own emotions. It's fun to watch June do the same thing, where, she has all these hurt feelings about her best friend publicly abandoning her on the dance floor in front of the entire country. And, she talks herself out of being upset about it by, like, making art about it and being like, but no, this is such a grand artistic gesture. I'm going to paint a mural about it, and then I'm never going to be upset about it again, ever. I'm not upset. I made art.
I mean, I sympathize.
Right. No, it's...
This part of me is not dead, thankfully.
Right. No, exactly. Like, that's one of the things that makes June a great character, is that, she feels very true to life. This feels very much like being a creative teenager who's avoiding dealing with any of your family issues by making everything about art.
Mm-hmm. And that actually brings me into something which I suppose I should have mentioned in the why you should read this book part, because, like, for me, despite the fact that, this is, I think, a well-constructed, interesting, generally enjoyable novel, the thing about it that I remembered, and that was what brought me back to it and made me want to, reread it for this, is that it does an incredibly good job of selling the art, and not just the visual art, but the music, the dance. The Palmares Trace feels impossibly vibrant. It's really lushly described. It makes you understand why June cares about it and cares for it, and why the idea of being exiled, and in fact the idea of leaving intentionally, could be such a wrench. Because it really is, despite, being a quote unquote dystopia, where people get omelas to keep it going, it is remarkable that this society is functioning well enough that even the quote unquote slums, like 2 people getting killed, is, makes national news, in a riot. It's like the standard of living and the standard of just sort of personal freedom and creative expression in this society are, like, really advanced. And sort of all of the sort of revolutionary awakening that happens has to be measured against that.
Yeah, and I mean, which is, the book seems kind of ambivalent about whether or not this society should be overthrown. June remains, at the very end of the book, pretty ambivalent over whether or not, any part of her society needs to be overthrown, except for perhaps the parts that have been, locking her out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I mean, she's fairly anti-ritual murder
yes.
by the end, I would say.
Yes, we need
bold stance here.
We need to get the thanatic impulses of the natural thanatic impulses of men out in a different way, perhaps by introducing more professional sports.
So, okay. Also, just speaking of this ritual murder, I do love the revelation near the end that the entire reason why they have this, like, ritually murder the king thing is it was introduced by the king because
men love dying. They just loved it.
Well,
they loved dying.
Yes, okay. But also, it's very specifically his way of covering up the fact that he's a CIA asset. Like, yes. It's this, incredibly symbolic, romantic thing that's, become this, this whole thing. But no, it's very specifically, people have found out that he was a CIA asset, and so he needs to die in the most romantic way possible to change the narrative.
It is South America at the end of the day.
Right, exactly.
Well, and it's, as we pointed out, it's kind of more 1960s than modern.
Right, exactly.
And that definitely includes random guys just random CIA guys just flying in with a suitcase full of money and a half a plan.
Yes, we moved on to native-born idiocy at this point with Bolsonaro and everything. But anyway,
and I mean, also
the
with the '60s thing, I mean, this is a post-nuclear, this is a post-nuclear Holocaust future.
right.
Yes.
So, which again, like it's
one of the.
Well, they had a nuclear holocaust, and they had the plague that kills all men. They really just went for it in this one.
And then they have the singularity wiping out most of Japan, apparently.
I do think it is really interesting in this book, and it's one of the. So my interpretation of it is that it's a running gag, that it's a post-apocalyptic setting, except it's really it's actually post-apocalyptic. It's not.
It's not just post-apocalyptic. Like we've actually built.
They have rebuilt a stable society, right?
Yes.
But every time the apocalypse is mentioned, it's a different cliche science fiction apocalypse. And it got to the point with me where I was like, this is a bit. I think this is just a bit, and it's very funny.
Right.
But like the number of terrible things that wiped out huge amounts of the human population that has happened to these people,
right,
is just extraordinary.
Well, I'm absolutely willing to accept that.
Yeah, me too.
One of the things that I liked less about this book is that it has a certain like post 9/11 media sort of tint in some ways. Like the fact that we go into a sort of pitch perfect, American cop drama style police interrogation, and that June is just like right in there and can do it at the age of 17 is weird. When she gets the hacker from the Verchi that and she's like being really cynical and like I'm too old for this in her head while she's doing it too. That's strange. The whole false flag thing is a little bit The
whole false flag thing is very much like early aughts teens. Like that was just the era of false flag stories, I feel like.
Right. I had a sort of Bush did 9/11, you say, sort of
right,
deal,
exactly.
Except on a much smaller scale in this case.
Yeah, it is very much so. I mean, this book was very much. It is the tail end of the YA love triangle boom, and it is which was the late aughts, early 2010s, and this is 2013.
Yeah.
And it is so dated now. Like, I mean, that is one of the ways in which it's dated there. Yeah, and that is definitely a thing. I first read this. It didn't feel dated because it was closer to when it came out, and
right.
that was still that thing was dying, but it wasn't dead, and now it just feels very anachronistic in a bunch of ways. But like, I mean, I don't know. Those books are good. I like a lot of those books, so I don't think I have anything wrong with reading it. But it was very striking to me rereading it this time how much it now seems like, oh yeah, this is from the last decade.
Also, very much her rivalry turned friendship with what's her name, Bebem, the other girl. It starts out starts out very much, I'm not like other girls, look at her, she's Miss Perfect and we hate each other. And then it becomes, no, actually the other girl has always thought you were cool and had a crush on you. And now is trying to convince you to have a threesome with her. And
Bebel might be a lesbian.
I mean, she's certainly into girls, and she's certainly into June, and but like the fact that whole narrative of this felt very much again like it's of this era where they're pushing back against the I'm the one cool girl.
Yes. I also think, my thought when I read that subplot, I think that is a very good observation, which I didn't really think about at all. My thought when I read that was, wow, this character exists solely for the purpose of establishing that June is bisexual. Because she only ever has sexual relationships with men in the book. But, like, we just need you to know that everyone in this love triangle is bisexual.
I wonder if the sort of the default bisexual novel, because we haven't been seeing as many of these as we used to at the sort of in the beginning of Wisles, I wonder if the default bisexual novel is also sort of going to seem dated. That there was a moment of real optimism about about everybody being sexually fluid that is receding at
Well,
this
I
point.
think it's also
But
now we're getting much more invested in everybody having a very specific label. I think that that's where the zeitgeist is going right now.
we've always been really invested in that.
No, because like the thing is, nobody in this book has a label.
That's true. Although they still have qualities, which is an important distinction.
Right, but I mean, the thing I feel like what we're seeing right now in the zeitgeist is more and more. Sometimes they even just say it when it doesn't make any sense. Be like, "Well, I am a demi-romantic pansexual." No, right? And like it's like yes, they're absolutely going to be using that term in the 26th century.
Yeah. How to date your book to now specifically.
Right, but I feel like that's part of why we're not getting a default bisexual universes as much anymore, because now everybody has to have the specific of the moment. What we all need to know exactly what flag pins they would be wearing.
Can I actually just say that this is? I'm going to get a little lefty for a moment, but one of the things that that I think is actually still very current and still very well observed is the whole, as you say, Queen's Award. We're going to give you a scholarship thing. What do you do with the with the teenage rebels, and what do you do with the more respectable of them and the less respectable of them? And I am reminded of the different ways in which the leadership of the Black Lives Matter movement was handled over the course of the last few years. And this is just discourse that I've seen. I don't feel like I can, speculate on it, but some of them were extrajudicially murdered, and some of them ended up doing pretty well for themselves. And there are ways that power and that capital can deal with dissent, and it's always important to realize that the carrot is also there alongside the stick and can be more effective. That's pretty much what I had to say about that.
I think actually that another role that Babel plays in the narrative is also to to sort of humanize June's June's willingness to sell out on the Queen's Award, because obviously the real selling out she does on the Queen's Award is her willingness to scale back a lot of her revolutionary activities. But Bebel's existence and the fact that June has to specifically cheat to do better than her on the tests is also sort of driving home that June is willing to compromise even her friendships and just become not just a sellout but also kind of a shitty person. And that and obviously then she walks that back, and then when she walks that back, she not only runs off with the Summer Prince and tries to rescue him from getting ritually murdered, she also fesses up about the cheating to Bebel and says, well, I'm about to disqualify myself, so now you're hopefully going to get the award.
In America, no matter which side of the political divide you happen to be on, there is a universal value, which is get that bag, get paid. And this is much more compatible with right-wing ideology than it is with lefts. But that's what we're stuck with. Now off to minor notes, except they're not really minor. Okay, I think that we're actually almost at a podcast now, so let's shall we share some random notes and thoughts? Unless there's any other big concepts that we want to talk about.
One thing I will say about June and revolutionary activities is while she frames herself as very revolutionary, she until she's forced into it, she's really primarily an artist, and her revolutionary interests are primarily aesthetic.
Yes.
Yeah. Again, the 1960s.
That was very well, but also right now. That's very well observed about.
Yes, every time there are young people.
Well, but also every time there are artists. I certainly know a lot of artists in their 40s and 50s who are very convinced that the fact that they are professional artists makes them inherently revolutionary.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no. The fact that they make a living selling their art makes them revolutionary, is it?
Yeah, and I'm not particularly interested in going deep on the politics or thinking about it, or even thinking about like, I one thing that interests me, and I have a friend who's a studio artist, and we talk a lot about the different economics of studio art versus fiction, which are very, very different economic structures. Boy, let me tell you. And there are really intense class implications and things about what you can and can't do. And it just is, anyway, that's super outside the point of this book, but I did think it was very interesting that sort of, June kind of has to be forcibly pulled into actually thinking about, wait, maybe something should change politically and not just
And when she
let me
starts,
express
that's
my
when she
ennui.
stops being able to make art. I mean, not because she's artistically blocked, just because she's too busy. I mean, she does get to like carve the tree and stuff like that. But, the book, she's spending all of her time, even when she should be studying, making art. And then she spends the last chunk of the book not having very many opportunities to make art because actually she's busy being a revolutionary.
Yeah, like it sort of it reminds me of ad busting, you know.
Yeah. Early June has super Adbusters vibes.
Right.
Yeah, or like the various sort of most like merry prankster sort of what the hell was his name, Michael Moore style political action.
Yeah.
And like how that is essentially nothing. And I think that the turning point, like I actually think this is very well handled. It's like they do the one thing that is really straddles the line between art and terrorism, which is the making everything stink
Yes.
bit. And whereas if actually like releasing a horrible smell in a subway was enough to create a political reaction, then New York would be in a constant state of revolution. But
Well, it's not just in the subway. They also do it, I think, in
the parliament itself, yeah.
Right, exactly.
Which is significantly more on the nose. But that is sort of she's sort of beginning to cross the line between, protest and direct action there without even noticing. And Anki, I think, is drawing her into that very
deliberately,
intentionally.
Yeah.
This is bringing it way back around, but there is actually an interesting note about the Sumerian names, and I don't know whether it's intentional on behalf of the author or not. But because, of course, Gil and Anki would be short versions of Gilgamesh and Enkidu. But also, Anki, the god of wisdom, is for whom Enkidu is named. That is in fact what the character is named. And I don't know whether that's coincidental, but I think there is something very interesting of he seems like he's the sexy wild man from outside, but actually he is very smart and he is pulling strings and has a goal and a plan. And I think that there might be a cool thing there. I don't know.
Absolutely. He's the Obama that Republicans thought Obama was. Pour one out. Anyway.
Do I have the most positive opinion of Barack Obama in this conversation?
Probably. I don't know.
I think I'm probably in the middle between you two. Probably closer to Lee.
Barack Obama personally saved the lives of several of my friends, so I like him.
Yes, he did that, and I will always give him his laurels for that. But I mean, I know that we're talking about Obamacare, but it does make it sound like he personally, saved them from drowning. Yes.
He leapt in and he ruined his coat, and that makes him a bad utilitarian. I don't know.
All right.
Anyway, so one last thing actually about June and art while we're sharing last notes is that I really enjoy that she's kind of salty when there's the graffiti that features there's the graffiti that features her, and there's the graffiti that features the two murdered kids in the riot. and people think it's her, and she's kind of salty that like somebody else's art is getting all this attention. And the piece of art she makes based on that is like the least interesting of all the art that she makes in the book. She's like kind of trying to cash in on this attention, and she makes her own version where the exit wound has all these flowers growing out of it or whatever. And it's like all the other art she does in the book, I think actually sounds like interesting art pieces. And that's like, yeah, that's actually just really derivative, June.
It's very Banksy.
Yeah, I was about to say, I actually just realized that June is Banksy.
Except,
And it's definitely, that's another way in which this book is dated.
Right.
Like, this book was published in 2013 when, like, Banksy meant a somewhat different thing culturally, I think.
Yes.
Before Exit Through the Gift Shop came out. You guys should watch Exit Through the Gift Shop, incidentally. The audience of this podcast is an interesting movie. Anyway, in Britain, there's an activist group called Led by Donkeys. Not to be confused with the military history podcast Lions Led by Donkeys, which is significantly better. But they're the current standard bearers for political action via big signs and minor acts of vandalism. This is about as effective as you might expect. I do appreciate that there are some basic, like, when we're talking about like role reversal SF, there are some really baseline role reversal bits in this. Like girls don't cry in this culture. But they're not like, but that's an aside that, comes up once. Mm-hmm. It's handled in a way that's like subtle. And I think that's one of the reasons why it doesn't come off as like, as tropey as it might. But that's pretty much the last note that I had.
Lee, final notes?
Oh!
So,
never mind. I just wanted to, I love the, I also want to say that I'm not going to attempt to do Bossa Nova with the jingles for this episode because it's incredibly fucking difficult. But I do think that unusually in this kind of SF, the idea that Bossa Nova would be considered classical music is completely believable. I think it will absolutely stand the test of centuries. And I enjoy the fact that the only English language song that comes up, even though Anki has this weirdly universal knowledge of ancient songs, is Send in the Clowns, because I think Sondheim will also be classical music. But anyway, that's my actual final thought.
Yes, I really did love the bit about what classical music is. And I mean, one of the ways in which this book is really well written is that it is very much in the head of its protagonist, and she's very much a daughter of her culture, and she does not explain things to you. And so you just sort of have to pick up where she's like, oh, it had this like classical bass line that was like this, and you're like, wait, that's different. Okay.
I'll be off to looking up how to play one note samba and then deciding that I can't. And after we're done recording. But so thank you for joining us, Lee.
Thank you for having me. That's always nice.
Indeed. And it really is always nice. I feel like this is sort of the I like the discussions that the three of us have. I think it works pretty well. But until next time. And now Isaac will play some classical music. This is Aguas de Marco, or The Waters of March, by Antonio Carlos Jobim. Forgive me, Carlos. A stick, a stone, it's the end of the road. Yeah, it's the rest of a stump, it's a little alone. It's a sliver. Nope, that's not right. It's a sliver of glass. It is life. No, that's not right. There we go. It is life. It's the A minor 6 over F sharp. Sun. It is night, it is death. It's a trap. It's a gun. And that's just the first 4 lines. It just keeps going like that. It's one of my favorite songs, though. I would sing it for you if I could.